Yeah. Thank you for coming to the session this afternoon. And perhaps you also participated in other activities of the World Economic Forum in the Open Forum sessions. During the course of the week, we've had films, we've had discussions, we've had a number of different topics which we've been handling. And I think it is great that more than 3,000 people have actually come to the forum. And also there are thousands more people who've been watching on live streaming and who are aware of all the different activities we've been putting on here. So a big word of thanks to you for all that. I think that is also very important that a lot of young people have been participating in the Open Forum. And that for us is always an incentive to make sure that we choose subjects which are important to everybody. I'll switch to English.
I have to introduce you to an incredible initiative that the Youth Forum Switzerland has done, and actually it has been the international school in Zug and Lucerne who came here last year. And they were intrigued by what was going on, and they felt, well, why don't we do something like this? And so they visited us in Geneva, they had conversations with us, and we're actually really happy that they started to make a serious competition. And so what I'd like to do is let's watch a short movie of how their event was just a couple of weeks ago, and then I'd like to introduce two of the organizers to you who were working on that. So let's have a look at the Youth Forum Switzerland's event a couple of weeks back.
I'm Wilhelmine, and I'm Camilla, and we are the lead students organizers of the Youth Forum Switzerland. Although we were so inspired by the many conversations that we had with such influential leaders, we realized that the youth was underrepresented in these discussions. And this is where the Youth Forum Switzerland comes in and is now reality. This event is based around the idea of the youth being empowered to really invest themselves in global issues that they are passionate about and that really interest them. We aim to get every single student involved in Youth Forum Switzerland. The theme for Youth Forum Switzerland 2018 is Embracing Diversity, Empowering Lives, which is broad enough to cover a wide range of fields so that everyone can find something that they are personally interested in and connect with our amazing list of guest speakers from around the world.
Fantastic. Now, please welcome two of the organizers with a very, very warm applause here up on stage. Camilla and Wilhelmine, would you please join me here? And do please explain us how this all worked out and how did you go about this and what your experiences were. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this introduction. My name is Camilla Elizabeth Russo, and this is Wilhelmine Paul, and we are the lead students organizers of the Youth Forum Switzerland that took place last week. So we kind of showed you the video, and we hope that you got an idea of what our event is all about, but we would really like to talk to you about where all of this came from. So, as it was mentioned before, last year we came here for 2 days in Davos, and we got to speak to so many inspirational and so many powerful people. But then we realized, and that was great, but then we realized that actually the youth was not really represented, and there was a clear lack of youth, although people our age are actually really interested in these discussions. So we contacted, when we were organizing the forum, we contacted Michelle Mischler from Here the Open Forum, and we met her in Geneva at the WEF headquarters, and she has been, and as well her team, so incredibly supportive of our initiative. She has been listening to what we had to say, to our ideas, and this is really empowering the youth. So we believe that in our world today, the people our age are often not really being given a seat at the table and a chance to speak up, to take action, and just be heard.
Thank you. So I'd also just quickly like to thank the Global Shapers Network, who played a big role in this, because last year, many of them were kind enough to actually come out of the WEF and to share their projects and their passions with us. And we were lucky enough to have a dozen of them attend our event last week, and to bring their inspirations to over 400 young people. So last year's Open Forum was one of the first times that I, as a young person, felt a degree of power and realized the potential that my voice could have. And again this year, we were able to reopen this intergenerational dialogue. And it is an honor to be able to share the stage with not only the likes of Malala and Al Gore, but again, to connect with even more of these global shapers who, as young leaders who are not much older than ourselves, are really the role models for our generation. So the Youth Forum Switzerland is created by students for us to kind of emulate the environment, the same environment that we felt here, for all of the youth in our local community. And because we feel that it is important for the change makers of today to include the change makers of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really fantastic, and we'll be very happy to continue to support you for your next edition of the Youth Forum Switzerland. So congratulations, that was really great. So now I'd like to switch over to today's session. And I must say, you are all very smart people, because you decided to come to a session called Secrets to a Long and Happy Life. And I'm actually quite sad that I can't stay on, because I'd be also curious how I could work on that. So it gives me really great pleasure to introduce Dan Buettner. He's a best-selling author, and he's a National Geographic Fellow, and I'm sure he will have a lot of interesting secrets to share for us to a long and happy life. Dan, please.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, it's nice to get out of the Congress Center and actually get to see a little bit of the real Davos, and thank you for coming out. I'm going to talk about the world's happiest people and the lessons they have to teach us. But first, I want to start with you. And I'm going to start, actually, by identifying the happiest people in the audience. And in order to do that, I need to ask you two binary questions. The first question is whether you think life is long or short. So if you think that life is long, raise your hand. If you think that life is long. Now raise your hand if you think life is short. All right? Second question, whether or not you think life is hard or easy. Raise your hand if you think life is hard. Life is, minority. Raise your hand if you think life is easy. There we go. Of course, you live in Davos. All right, I want everybody who raised their hands thinking that life is long and easy to stand up. Stand up. Don't worry, I won't humiliate you. Too bad. Okay, stay standing. So a few years ago, stay standing if you would. A few years ago, a Harvard scientist by the name of Mike Norton led a team of surveyors worldwide, and they asked people these exact same questions and correlated them to happiness, civics, and generosity. And they found, 3,000 surveys, they found that the least happy people believed that that their lives were short and hard. The happiest people believed that life is long and easy. They also were more likely to vote and more likely to contribute money to charity. So could we give a big World Economic Forum to the people standing up here? Look around. These are the people you want to invite to your next cocktail party and fundraiser. So I'm going to fix my pants here. My mother would be disappointed in me if I showed up sloppy. So, okay. So at National Geographic, over the past 15 years, I've developed a bit of an expertise at finding the most extraordinary populations on Earth and distilling their lessons. And my first big project had to do with longevity. Something called the Danish Twin Study established that only about 20% of how long you live on average is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is dictated by lifestyle and environment and just a little bit your health care. But the majority of it, lifestyle and environment. So my team and I at National Geographic set out to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity. We spent 2.5 years working with a team of demographers to identify the statistically longest lived area. We found the longest lived women in the world in Okinawa, about 30 times more female centenarians there than you'd see in a European population on average. Icaria, Greece, almost no dementia there. Sardinia, Italy, the longest lived men live in the highlands of Sardinia, the Nuoro province. Nicoya, Costa Rica, has the lowest rate of middle-age mortality. In other words, middle-aged people have the best chance of reaching a healthy age 90. And in Loma Linda, California, a group of Americans, conservative Methodists actually, who live about 8 to 10 years longer than the average American. So they have achieved what we wanted. And we found that no matter where you go in the world and see long-lived people, you see the same 9 things happening over and over and over again. But since I'm focusing on happiness for this speech, I'm going to jump right to the bottom line. The main principle of longevity no matter where you go. And it took me 8 years to discover what I'm going to tell you right now. When you find a population of people where the 80-year-olds are still standing on their head and the 90-year-olds are still skiing and the 100-year-olds are still karate master, it's not because they tried to live a long time. Longevity just happened to them. They never got on diets. They never started to do exercise programs. They didn't take supplements. They didn't call a number on TV that promised them some longevity scheme. Longevity happened to them. And the big insight here is that if you really want to live a long time, what works is letting longevity ensue as opposed to trying to pursue longevity. Where you go and you see people living a long time, you see the same 5 environmental factors in place. First of all, they have a system of eating the right way. They eat 90 to 100% plant-based foods. 4 foods you see in every longevity culture in the world as their main staples: whole grains, greens, nuts, and beans. They eat about a cup of beans a day. They move naturally. They don't exercise in the way we think of exercise, but every time they go to work or to school or to a friend's house, it occasions a walk. They have gardens. They don't have mechanical conveniences to help them do housework or yard work or kitchen work. They're doing it by hand. Every 20 minutes or so, they're nudged into a little bit of physical activity, which not only adds up to more calorie burning than you do in a gym, but it keeps their metabolism at a higher rate. They have vocabulary for purpose. They live in the right community. They have vocabulary for purpose. They surround themselves with the right people, and they live in a community that has an environment that facilitates these behaviors. So it's an interconnected, mutually supporting cluster of environmental factors that adds up to longevity. So to do a study like this responsibly, you have to be able to measure it carefully. You can't just go by anecdote. And when it comes to longevity, the exercise is pretty straightforward. You go back about 100 years, and you find a population of people born, say, between 1915 and 1920, and then you have to follow them their entire lives, adjust for immigration and emigration. Yes, this is the same person, and you see how many people are still alive. It's pretty straightforward math. There's a lot of places that we thought were long-lived. The Caucasus of the Soviet Union, Vilcabamba Valley of Ecuador, Hunza Valley of Pakistan, they've all been debunked. We did the research to make sure these are truly longevitous places. So longevity is pretty easy to measure, but how about happiness? Happiness is a little spongier. You could find somebody who's smiling today, but they may be depressed for the rest of the month. Or they don't exactly know if they're happy, or if they don't exactly know what you're talking about, or they may have just had a few cocktails or a few glasses of beer. So how do you measure happiness? Well, I'm proud to say that this past year, I brokered a very innovative study to measure happiness, and it involved Google, a collaboration between Google, Gallup, and the University of Pennsylvania's World Wellbeing Project. And they correlated what you look for on the internet, what you search for on the internet in 200 cities, and they correlated it with your happiness. And they found actually that what you look for on the internet is a better predictor of your happiness than your income or your education level. This study also revealed that people who own dogs and look for information about their dogs are happier than cat owners. People who are looking for action movies or comedy movies are happier than people looking for romance movies. And in case you like your romance by yourself in private, people who are looking for softcore porn are happier than those who like the harder stuff. And don't worry, this was anonymized data. We do not know who you are. But for a recent article I wrote in National Geographic, I wrote the cover story for the November issue, and a book called Blue Zones of Happiness. We dove into a much bigger ocean of data. Several international organizations around the world, 151 countries in fact, participate in these random sample subjective well-being surveys. And these surveys ask you a number of questions about your happiness and then a number of other questions about your life. And with these surveys, we can kind of get insight into people, but we can also identify the happiest places in the world and what accompanies that happiness. So I actually want to dive down in that a little bit. So what do I mean? So when it comes to happiness, academically speaking, it's a meaningless term because you can't really measure happiness. But you can measure life satisfaction. The way that's measured is surveyors ask people, consider your life as a whole, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life? And it turns out that yields a pretty good response, especially when you ask thousands of people. That averages out the errors of people who are exaggerating or understating their happiness. But because we only remember about 2% of our lives, we tend to remember the high points and the low points. If I ask you what you had for lunch a week ago Tuesday, you probably couldn't tell me. So this life satisfaction measure is evaluative, and it's only one facet of happiness. Another facet is your daily emotions. And because you can pretty accurately remember the last 24 hours, when surveyors ask you how much you felt joy, and how much you smiled, and how much you worried, and how much you felt stress, we can get a pretty good idea of how you're experiencing life. And those two are only correlated by about 0.5%. They're moderately correlated, not the same thing. And then they can measure purpose by asking you a few questions about if you're able to use your strengths to do what you do every day. So those three come together, and then these surveys ask about 80 other questions about your demographics, your values, and your life characteristics. And through the magic of something called regression analysis, you can start to see very clearly which of these things are favoring each of these three facets of happiness with remarkable consistency. And when you distill that all down, it becomes a very good prescription for longevity. And I'm going to tell you what that prescription is. But first, in the spirit of National Geographic, I'm going to reveal that mystery by taking you to a few faraway places and telling you a story. And the story we're going to tell you are of the world's happiest places. And the first place I'm going to take you to is the happiest place in Asia. Does anyone want to guess the happiest place in Asia? Anyone? What do you think? What is it? Japan? Bhutan? Bhutan, I hate to say, is number 91 in the world. That national happy stuff is mostly a PR whitewash. What? Myanmar? So. Who said that? Singapore. Thailand actually was top last year, but over the past 5 years, it's been Singapore. When you average the last five years together, Singapore comes out on top on both life satisfaction and absence of negative affect. So Singapore is kind of an amazing place. In 1965, it was mostly a fishing village. And in the last 40 or 50 years, they've had the most remarkable economic success in the history of the world. Their economy has doubled 15 times, giving people a feeling of constantly getting better. They have one of the highest GDPs in the world and also one of the highest life expectancy. 5 different ethnicities live there in remarkable harmony. The Indians, the Malay, Muslims, and the Han Chinese. And this isn't by chance, by the way. This entire country, I believe, was architected by this man right here, Lee Kuan Yew, a Cambridge-educated lawyer, speaks the Queen's English, but supremely understands the values of the Asian people he is overseeing. In Europe and the United States, we operate under a set of Judeo-Christian values. We tend to celebrate self-actualization and individualism, whereas in Asia, Confucian values, they tend to value more security and harmony and respect. And they're a little bit more collective. So he went about building a society based on the values of the people who live there. He made sure that everybody could own their own home. People take care of their own home better than they take care of a rented home. But not just that, he made sure that every housing project reflected the ethnic diversity of the entire country. So you did not have a ghetto of the Malay, and you didn't have a gated community of the Han Chinese. Kids of all ethnicities went to school together, they worked together, they all had equal opportunity. He was very tough on crime and also very tough on enforcement, and that's very conscious. If you get caught doing a violent crime, you're probably going to get caned, which is violent. You basically get beaten. If you get caught with more than 15 grams of an opioid, you'll be put to death. Now that sounds draconian, but and indeed a few dozen people are hung every year because they're caught with drugs. But on the other hand, they don't have an opioid crisis. Where I come from in the United States, about 45,000 people die every year from opioid ODs. We spend $500 billion, and that problem ripples down to children, it ripples down to people who end up going to prison, causes a lot of misery. Also being very tough on crime, women and children can walk any place in the entire country day and night and be pretty sure they will not be accosted or become a victim of a crime. And when it comes to straight aggregate misery or aggregate happiness, this emphasis on security over absolute freedom is producing more, to put it bluntly, happiness. I'm not saying I advocate it, but it's working very well for the Singaporeans. Singapore delivers a type of happiness for people who like a clear path to success. Work hard, keep your head down, forego some pleasures of today, and you're almost assured financial success in the future. Your mother will be proud of you, your friends will be impressed, and you'll have this very high life satisfaction. But this type of happiness is mostly happiness you see in the rearview mirror. But it's still important. If you think you're happy, that actually counts. On the other side of the planet, we found another happy population in northern Denmark. And this is a place that excels. They have the top scores in the world for equality, trust and tolerance. So these trust, tolerance, and equality are actually more important than raising GDP when it comes to delivering happiness. GDP is important for really poor countries like Bangladesh or Paraguay, but they're really not that important for countries like the United States or Switzerland. In other words, working really hard to raise GDP is not going to raise happiness much, but raising trust, tolerance, and equality will. The whole Danish cliche that the reason they're happy is because they have low expectations could not be further from the truth. Every man, woman, and child in the country expects free education, and when they go to college, not only do they expect free tuition, they expect to be paid to go to the university, and they do. They expect free health care, and when they have a baby, they expect to have 10 months to make sure they can stay home, paternity or maternity leave, to make sure that baby gets a good start. And they expect to retire with complete comfort. And indeed, Danes over age 60 are the happiest cohort of people in the entire world. So this is a place, since all their basic needs are taken care of, it's a place that does not celebrate ambition very much. So all the incentives are in place for you to get a job that you really love. In America, only about 30% of Americans love their job, according to Gallup. In Denmark, it's about 80%. So most people are able to pursue their passions at work, and indeed, Denmark's a place that excels at furniture building, design, architecture. They work 37 hours a week, and they mostly knock off mid-afternoon, and they belong to clubs, the clubs wherein they can pursue their hobbies. So this is a type of place that is going to appeal to people who want to follow their purpose and their passion, whether it's rabbit jumping or bicycle riding au naturel. By the way, the photographers on this project were Corey Richards and David McLean, and they helped bring this story together. However, I do not recommend you do this at home. So the spot on the globe where both longevity and happiness come together best is in the small Central American country of Costa Rica. In the Nicoya Peninsula, up there, you have the longest lived people, but just a little bit to the north in the Central Valley of Costa Rica, you have the happiest people in the world. Happiness is measured by day-to-day positive emotions. So the Central Valley is a place where it's eternally springtime. The temperature only varies by about 10 degrees from year to year. You're surrounded by beautiful nature, has the best coffee in the world. But Costa Rica had the advantage over the other countries in Central America in that the first presidents were teachers instead of dictators or people kind of put in place by the military. Their top values are family and religion. And indeed, no matter where you go in the world, religious people report higher levels of happiness than their non-religious counterparts. It's not to say that you should be religious if you're not. It just says religion corresponds to being happier. The type of happiness that excels in Costa Rica is the type of happiness that suggests that you're experiencing life optimally, sort of the carpe diem. Costa Ricans will almost never do a couple extra hours of work when they can be socializing. Their cities are set up so they're walking most places, they're bumping into their friends, they're shopping at a central market, and Sunday afternoon family gatherings happen every week with certainty. No matter where you go in the world and you find happy populations, it's not a coincidence. This sort of happiness myth that you can go to villages in Africa or Asia and see happy people dancing and, oh, if only I could live there, I'd be happier. Complete myth. Where you find true happiness populations between 50 and 150 years ago, enlightened leaders shifted their focus from economic development and started to concentrate on, number one, education. And I don't mean just printing out PhDs. I mean making sure that every child can read. Remarkably, Costa Rica and Denmark were the first countries in their hemisphere to educate the daughters of farmers. That was a radical idea 150 years ago. So when you educate girls, they grow up to be educated mothers. They have fewer children who themselves are better educated. They're healthier. Those kids grow up to be more productive, healthier. They make better voting decisions, and it creates an upward ratcheting spiral of happiness. They focused on health, but not the back-asswards sick care we have in the United States. It usually means public health. It's making sure people don't get sick in the first place. And they also emphasize equality. It's either usually through taxation or making sure that quality public services are a human right, not just an option. And the reason why this delivers happiness is because $100 or an extra $100 or 100 francs in the hands of a single mother provides much more happiness than the extra $100 in the hands of a millionaire. So that works for countries. But when it comes to individuals, the secret is really about a balanced portfolio. In the same way, for your financial life, your financial advisor will tell you to have cash, stocks, and bonds. When it comes to happiness, I will tell you to make sure you're enjoying your life a little bit every day, you know your sense of purpose, and you're making enough effort so you can look back on your life and be proud. And these three come together like strands in a rope that make for strong, authentic happiness. But it turns out different things favor each of these three. When it comes to life satisfaction, working full-time, making sure you're making at least the equivalent of $75,000 a year, and being financially secure will help you with that life satisfaction. When it comes to purpose, it's more important that you know your values, you know your strengths, you know your passions, and you're putting those to work, or you're caring for others. And when it comes from optimal daily emotions, you want to make sure you're given at least 7 hours of sleep no matter what. You have some access to nature, and you're maximizing vacation. There's actually a set of factors that favor at least two of these. Having a faith, going to college, and have kids is good for your life satisfaction and your purpose. Not so great for your daily affect or daily meditating and volunteering when it comes to purpose and daily emotions. And it seems that if you're having sex at least twice weekly, it's not only good for your daily experience, but you'll be very happy with your life indeed. The sweet spot, however, are these 5 things. Making sure you have a job that addresses your passions and your gifts. Socializing at least 7 hours a day. The happiest people in the world are having face-to-face conversations at least 7 hours a day. Owning a dog. Being married. Not all couples are happy, but you're about 3 times more likely to be happy if you can stick your marriage out for 10 years than people who throw in the towel and get divorced. And the most important thing is this right here. Right home. So if happiness were a cake recipe, important ingredients include having food, having shelter, having some health care, having a job, marrying the right person, having a feeling like you're giving back. But the most important ingredient, the ingredient with the most variability, is where you live. In other words, if you live in an unhappy place and move to a happy place, it's the most powerful thing you can do to increase the likelihood of happiness. And we know this because we followed immigrants when they moved from Moldavia to Copenhagen and when they moved from happy places in Africa and Asia to Canada. Within 1 year, they start reporting the elevated happiness levels of their adoptive home. Their gender doesn't change, their age doesn't change much, their education doesn't change, their sexual preference doesn't change. All they did was move. Not all of us can pick up and leave our lives and move to a happier place, but statistics tell us a few long-term changes to our environment we can do to stack the deck in favor of our own personal happiness. So most of us spend most of our lives within about 8 kilometers of our home. And I've identified 6 domains that you can optimize with long-term interventions. When it comes to the individual, I'm not a big believer in positive psychology. Appreciation journals and savoring and gratitude, they're nice ideas. They might work in the short run, but as soon as people stop doing them, lose discipline or attention, they stop working. However, learning how to meditate, and I mean a deep training like Vipassana, does, it seems, rewire your brain so you can better appreciate the moment. When it comes to your finances domain, you're better, and you have a little bit extra money, you're much better off buying insurance, paying off your mortgage, or getting involved in automatic savings plans than you are buying a new pair of shoes or a new electronic gadget. Because the utility or the luster of a new thing wears off in 9 to 14 months, whereas financial security will last years, decades, or a lifetime. A much better investment, if you will, in happiness. When it comes to your home, making sure there's lots of natural light. Making sure you're nudged into social interaction by favoring the front of your house that faces the street rather than the backyard. Organizing something that I call a pride shrine. Finding one place in your house where you walk by every day and you put up pictures of your children, your accomplishments, of your favorite vacation destination. So every time you walk by, you get a little surge of joy. Goes back to that idea of positive emotions. Social network, it's huge. We now know that if your 3 best friends are obese, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight yourself. Drug use is contagious. Alcoholism is contagious. Unhappiness is contagious. Even loneliness is contagious. You really kind of are the sum of your 5 best friends. And while I won't tell you to dump your fat, unhappy friends, I will tell you that proactively bringing some healthy and happy people into your social network will have a lasting impact on your own happiness and health. So curating that is very important. Every new happy friend you add to your social network increases your own chance of happiness by 15%. When it comes to your job, if you're making at least $75,000 a year, you should really be thinking about ratcheting back and focusing on your passions. If you can't leave your job, which most of us can't, the number one most important thing you can do to add happiness to your work experience is, and this comes from 2 million surveys, make a best friend at work. More important than money, more important than recognition, more important even than having a great boss. And then finally, thinking about how you can optimize your community. So with National Geographic and Gallup, we did a big study to identify the happiest places in the United States. U.S. isn't that different than Europe. But we find that no matter where you go, where people are reporting high happiness in all 3 of these facets, they tend to be very bikeable communities, walkable communities, with easy access to recreation, and with a leadership that focuses on quality of life, as opposed to just development. So the bottom line here, the headline is, if you want to be, well, when it comes to trying to change your habits, that works occasionally for the short run, but it fails for almost all people almost all the time. So if you want to live longer or be happier, don't try to change your behavior, change your environment. So I want to close with the best piece of advice I got on happiness. So I spent 10 years doing this research, and I found the happiest man in the world in northern Mexico. His name is Armando Aguirre Fuentes, and he's a columnist. He's a short guy with a lantern jaw. He writes 4 columns a day, and he writes about happiness. He writes about life. I sat down with him for 2 hours and got the most amazing interview. But at the end of the interview, I said, can you sum it up for me in just one phrase? If people want to be happier, what should they do? And he said, eat without gluttony, drink without getting drunk, love without jealousy. You can argue, but never go to bed mad, and occasionally, with great discretion, misbehave. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Linda Grattan. I'm Professor of Management Practice at the London Business School. I wrote a book called The 100-Year Life. So like Dan, I'm fantastically interested in how we have wonderful lives. I was one of the people who said I was going to live long and it was going to be easy. We have a very short time for questions. So I'm going to take 2 questions simultaneously. Who's first? Hands up. Remember, I'm a business school teacher, so I'm perfectly capable at just pointing. Who has a question? I have lots of questions, by the way. So these 2, so anyone else got a question? Okay. May I take those first 2 questions from those 2 gentlemen first, and then we'll hear the sort of issues that are on your mind. Thank you.
Jim, I had a challenge answering your first 2 questions because the notion of time is really funny. I've been married for 20 years, and it's both a long time and an instant. It's a complete joy, and yet I can't remember being single. And so I had a problem with the first question, answering, is life long, or it was the second one, is life long, or is it short?
So let's hold on that. Let's hear a second question. Thank you, Sid. Second question. Or observation. I think that was an observation. Let's have a question.
Yeah, hi. I come from Singapore.
So
a lot of things are going through my mind just now.
For those of us in the West this year, we've had a lot from Singapore.
Yeah. But I've been living in Germany for 7 years, so it's a bit different. And I'm just wondering, how you got your data from. And I know in Singapore there's a land of disparities. So on one hand, we have people who are very satisfied with the government. But on the other hand, we have a problem, a bit of a brain drain problem. So we have about 3 million citizens, and about 220,000 citizens are living overseas and don't want to come back. And these are highly educated people and things like that. So you mentioned earlier as well that it's important to give people education and that broad-based and move everyone forward socially. But then we have a problem that our educated citizens are leaving and not coming back, and some of them take other citizenships. So, I don't know, how do you reconcile this in terms of happiness? Because it seems to me that Singaporeans, as they get more educated, as more exposed, they get a bit unhappier. And so this whole idea of satisfaction and happiness for me is a bit difficult, because you can be satisfied with your standard of living, but still be unhappy about your purpose in life.
Yeah, I'm still going to hold, actually, because these are very interesting observations and questions. Anybody else have an observation or a question? Yes, sir, you have.
My name is Joseph Persis from Davos. I have a question. We are now in the generation Internet, and I found nothing written from Internet in the points of happiness.
Yeah,
what do you expect that Internet would change our experience? What is happiness and what is not?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to take... Anyone else got a question? Because these are such... Yes, you have. What's your question or observation? These are happiness and life satisfaction, by the way, are very contentious issues, and so you're right to be raising some of the questions that you're raising. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Federico. I'm a global shaper from El Salvador. And some people here at Davos are saying that social media and Facebook and other platforms are creating, are changing the way our dopamine works in the brain to make us addicted and sometimes sadder. So I was wondering your personal take on that. And then is there any correlation between gratitude and happiness for you? And how do you embrace gratitude in your life?
Great. Thank you so much for those questions. A really interesting question about time. A fascinating observation about Singapore. By the way, if you look at the world's cities and look at them by way of creativity, Singapore isn't, as you know, isn't in that list. So there are many different ways of measuring what it is that's happening at the level of a city. And 2 really interesting observations about social media, and we're all talking a great deal about this. In fact, if I were to write my blog on Davos this week, which I will do tomorrow, it will be about artificial intelligence and the impact of technology on the way we live. Dan, we're completely running out of time, but my question to you is this, exactly these 2 points. What do you have kids, presumably, when they're on their iPhones all the time? How do you feel about that?
Well, I hate it. I make them put it away. I have what I call it.
So you take the Singaporean view.
I have what I call it in my house, iPhone condoms. And they have to put them in there before dinner, and they can't take them.
So what happens when they get to an age where you can no longer tell them what to do?
Well, so let me address this idea of social media. So National Geographic and we teamed up, and we asked 150,000 people the standard questions for happiness. And by the way, these were developed by Nobel Prize-winning psychologists, a guy by the name of Daniel Kahneman. So they're very carefully, and they seem sort of facile, but actually they've been studied carefully. And when you ask these protocol questions, and you also ask a question about how many hours you're on social media, we find actually that when people are on social media between 0 and about 1 hour a day, it actually contributes to their happiness. And we theorize the reason for that is it connects them in the real world, and it provides some intellectual repose and some nice entertainment. But after that curve, after about 2 hours, the happiness really starts dropping off, and it continues to drop off for 8 hours. And it seems that when you're on social media and trying to live your life online as opposed to in the real world, it's really detrimental to your happiness. I want to answer the very smart gentleman's question about Singapore. So every country has problems, and it's our human nature to see as a whole, the part of the glass that's not full, but the part of the glass that's empty. And that's, by the way, that's the part that we hear about most in the media. But when you ask a random selection of 3,000 Singaporeans these protocol questions, and 3,000, actually about 1,500 random samples is the gold standard. If you ask 1,500 people, you get an answer that's only 1 or 2%. There's only about a 1 or 2% error in the aggregate answer. But when you ask Singaporeans these questions about life satisfaction and how much negativity you felt in the past 24 hours, they most consistently over the past 5 years themselves report the highest satisfaction with their lives and the least amount of daily agony. So my job as an investigator is to pull out some of the correlations and to try to do some investigating reporting. And that's all I try to do. And by the way, I wrote this book called Blue Zones of Happiness, where I unpack the reason with more detail. But, you know, I had about 3 minutes to do it here. So I know it's an insufficient answer, and I'd love to talk to you more about it.
I'm conscious of time, actually. We're really coming towards the end of this session. Let me just make summaries and make some observations. All over the world, people are trying to understand how we live, why we live. The work that Dan's done, particularly on why people live long and why they're happy, is incredibly important, because I think I'm a psychologist. And so what it does is it places what we know about psychology, the individual, in the context. But I think, just to summarize and finish with our friend from Singapore here, one of my closest friends is Danish, and she would say just the same as you say about Singapore. She ran away as fast as she could. And actually, that's one of the issues, isn't it? That, in fact, happiness requires a level of conformity that maybe some of us don't want to experience. Maybe some of us don't want to be happy all the time. Maybe we want to be entrepreneurial. Maybe we want to do difficult and different things. And so I think what Dan's work has done is really shown us, if you want to be happy, this is how life is. But if you don't want to be happy, you can do other things as well. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job.